Not a gunshot, not a scream, just a glance that lasted half a second. A lifted phone, a whisper, "I have a bad feeling." And just like that, the police were called. Crescent Hill, a place where peace was packaged like a promise between white fences and bird song. Where every lunch felt trustworthy, every smile was properly shaped, and every unfamiliar face was a question no one dared to speak aloud. That afternoon, a black family dared to bring laughter into the park. They didn't know that laughter would trigger something, because in a place like this, peace is never free. There's a stillness in Crescent Hill Park that you don't forget. A hum beneath the children's laughter, behind the rustle of oak leaves above. It's not quite silence. It's something softer, a memory of safety, repeated over decades, until even the grass seems to remember your name. That afternoon, the park looked like a painting mid-stroke. Soft golden light swept across the field. Children's voices rang like wind chimes. A gentle breeze passed through the vines and petals. Everything felt as it always had, familiar. Predictable. Comfortable. I walked the path I always did. Same route, same rhythm. My legs moving before my mind. It was a habit. It was home. Until I saw them. A family I didn't recognize, far across the grass, near the playground. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, his laughter booming like the sky. A woman beside him, graceful, her sunlit curls glowing, their children spinning through the grass in fits of laughter. Everything looked normal. And yet I stopped. There was no commotion, no real reason to pause. Just a pull in my chest, a whisper you can't quite name. Do I know them? Should I? I kept walking, but the thought stayed behind, circling like wind around a closed window. Had they just moved to the neighborhood? Visiting. Passing through, my steps slowed as I neared the playground, where I saw a few familiar faces. Mrs. Jenkins, retired, always knitting, sat on the same bench she occupied every Tuesday. The Martin family, with their toddler and tired smiles, waved as I passed. I approached Mrs. Jenkins and sat beside her. Her knitting needles clacked in the silence between us. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I said. "Lovely weather," she replied, eyes never leaving the yarn in her lap. I hesitated, then nodded toward the family. "Do you know them?" "The ones having the picnic?" She squinted, then shrugged. "No, don't think I've seen them before." "Must be new." I nodded again, more to myself than to her. "I just don't remember ever seeing them." "People come and go, Evelyn. It's a park," she said casually, turning back to her stitching. She was right. It was a park, a public space. But I still couldn't let it go. I stood, excused myself, and walked on. But instead of the usual calm, something inside me began to shift. The family still laughed in the distance, their joy unhidden. But in my mind, new thoughts had taken root. What if they weren't just enjoying a sunny afternoon? What if they were here for something else? The park had always felt safe, predictable, whole, and now something felt off. I didn't know what or why. I just knew the wind suddenly felt colder, and I couldn't stop watching. I kept walking, but the image of them stayed behind my eyes like a shadow that refused to leave. They weren't doing anything wrong, that much was clear. But something about the way they occupied space, too comfortably, too easily, made me uneasy. I knew it didn't matter, but it did. I reached the southern path, pretending to look at flower beds, but my mind drifted back to that picnic blanket. I could still hear their laughter, warm, genuine. Still, unfamiliar. I took out my phone. Julie would understand. She always did. "Hey, you busy?" I asked when she answered. "Not really," she said. "Everything okay?" I paused, unsure how to explain something I couldn't even put into words for myself. "I'm at the park, and there's a family here. I don't recognize them." They're having a picnic, but I don't know. Something doesn't feel right." Julie was silent. "Feels strange." "What do you mean?" I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice level. "It's just, who has a picnic like this in the middle of a weekday? I've lived here for over 10 years, Julie. I know this park. I know the people here, and I've never seen them before." Julie chuckled softly, the kind meant to ease tension. "Evelyn, it's a public park. People come and go. Maybe they're just passing through." "Maybe," I said, but the knot in my stomach tightened. "But what if they're not?" Julie sighed. "You're overthinking this. Just let it go." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, maybe you're right." But even after I ended the call, the feeling lingered. Now they were seated, the man gesturing animatedly as he told a story, the woman smiling softly. The children were giggling between bites of fruit. It was a perfect picture. Too perfect. My heart beat faster. I felt ridiculous thinking this, but what if I wasn't wrong? What if they weren't who they appeared to be? I looked at my phone again. My thumb hovered above the screen. Just to be safe, that's what I told myself. When the dispatcher answered, my voice was calmer than I expected. "Hi, I'm at Crescent Hill Park. There's a family here that seems out of place. I think someone should come check it out." They asked for details. I gave them carefully, neutrally, as if distance would make it sound reasonable. When the call ended, I told myself I'd done the right thing. That caution wasn't the same as prejudice. I was just looking out for my neighborhood, but deep down, something trembled. I returned to the bench near the playground, hands clenched in my lap. I watched the family, still unaware, still laughing. Then, the sound. At first, faint. A siren. My heart dropped to my stomach. Here it was. I was about to find out whether I had trusted my instincts or made a terrible, irreversible mistake. I kept telling myself I had done the right thing. I repeated it, silently, rhythmically, like a prayer I didn't really believe. It was just caution, Evelyn, just being careful, nothing more. But when the first siren sounded in the distance, something inside me clenched. The sound was faint at first, no louder than a leaf blower from the next block. But I knew. The low wail rose steadily, urgent and unmistakable. It wound through the trees like smoke. I sat up straighter on the bench, suddenly cold despite the sun. My hands clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I looked at the family across the field, still unaware, still laughing, and I couldn't breathe. What had I done? A police car rolled along the edge of the playground, slowly, quietly. Then another behind it. 2 officers stepped out, one tall, broad, walking with purpose. The other younger person was scanning the park with a puzzled expression. I was already standing before I realized I had moved. I raised my hand, not to wave, but to identify myself. The taller one approached, steady and direct. "Ma'am, are you the one who called?" "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That was me." "Thank you for coming." I pointed toward the family, still sitting on their blanket, unaware. "It's that group." He followed my finger. "What seems to be the issue?" My voice trembled. I don't know them. I've lived here for over a decade. I know most faces. And something about their behavior. I just had a bad feeling." He raised an eyebrow, waiting. I added, "They don't look like they're from around here." I thought, maybe it's better to be safe than sorry. He didn't react. "We'll speak with them. Please stay here." I watched the 2 officers cross the grass. My stomach twisted so tightly I thought I might be sick. I noticed people around the park starting to watch. The young couple is near the swings, and the jogger is by the fountain, but they weren't looking at the family. They were looking at me. Did they know what I had done? I crossed my arms, hugging myself as the wind picked up. I stared across the field, trying to look composed while my thoughts raced. The father stood as the officers approached, holding his son close. The mother rose beside him, a question in her eyes. They weren't panicked. Not yet, not completely, but I saw it, the shift. Subtle, practiced. The father's voice lowered. The mother's shoulders tightened. The children drew in closer. The officer asked for identification. I saw the father calmly reach for his wallet. The mother did the same. No argument. No resistance. Just tense, silent compliance that gave me chills. They shouldn't have looked so calm while being questioned. But they did. The moment stretched. One of the children glanced toward the playground, then up at her mother. She didn't speak, she didn't cry, but her small hands clutched her mother's dress tighter. My eyes locked on the officers as they examined the IDs. Their posture softened. Something shifted. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw nods. A quiet exchange. Respect. My heart pounded harder now, not from fear, but from confusion. Who were they? The officer said a few more words, then turned and began walking back toward me. Every step made my chest tighter. They stopped in front of me. The tall one looked at me, not angry, not condescending, but calm. "Ma'am," he said, "we spoke to the family. Everything's in order." Those words hit like a punch. "Ma'am, the man you called about, his name is Congressman Isaac Bennett. His wife, Dr. Naomi Bennett, is a pediatric surgeon." I didn't move. I couldn't. The sun still shone. Children still laughed somewhere in the background. But inside me, everything went silent. A congressman? My mouth was dry. My pulse thundered in my ears like war drums. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but all that surfaced was the churn in my stomach. Are you sure?" I managed to ask, barely above a whisper. The officer nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. They're highly respected members of this community. They've visited Crescent Hill for years. Years. Not strangers, not a threat, not outsiders." And I had looked at them and seen suspicion, heard their laughter, and labeled it dangerous. Seeing their joy, I dialed 911. My legs felt unsteady. I wanted to sit, to vanish, to rewind the last 20 minutes and rip the fear from my hands. But I just stood there, blinking, paralyzed. "I didn't know," I whispered. The officer's tone softened, not with comfort, but with warning. "I'm sure you meant well, but calls like this, they can end very differently. Next time, ma'am, be sure." He looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not angry, not cruel, just disappointed. Then he turned and walked away, and I stood there, hollow. The patrol car pulled off quietly. I turned back toward the family. They had resumed their picnic, but the energy had shifted. The father sat closer to his wife, his arm draped over her shoulder, not romantic but protective. The children leaned in toward her. The laughter was gone. I had taken it. And suddenly, I couldn't bear to be there anymore. I turned and walked away. Each step was heavier than the last. My breath came short. My thoughts felt larger than the world around me. I thought I was a good person. I thought I was protecting my community. But maybe I was just protecting my comfort. Isaac Bennett. Naomi placed a hand on my shoulder after the officers walked away. I nodded. Slow, steady. The steadiness born from years of practice. The kind you build not in peace, but in necessity. Our kids didn't fully understand what had happened, not completely. But they felt it. They always feel it. I watched them cling to their mother. I swallowed the rage rising in my throat. Not now, not in front of them. Not again. I know what people will say. It was just a misunderstanding. Maybe she meant well. She didn't know who you were. But that's the whole point. They only believe we deserve safety once they know our titles, not when we're just a man in the park, a father, a human being. Naomi Bennett. We stayed a little longer, pretended to eat, smiled at the kids, but the warmth had drained from the day, like a shadow slowly stretching across the sky. When we got home, I helped the children out of the car and watched them run inside. Laughter echoed again for a moment. Then silence. Isaac sat at the kitchen table, still, his hands clenched, as if holding something fragile. "Do you want to talk?" I asked gently. "No," he said, then paused. "Yes, but I don't know what to say." I sat across from him. His eyes were tired. "I'm just tired, Naomi, tired of proving we belong, that we're not a threat. That we've earned the right to sit on the grass and laugh with our children." I took his hand. "I know," I said, "but we can't stop." "Not now, not ever." Evelyn Monroe. I didn't sleep that night. The images kept replaying. The family is on the blanket. The officers are walking away. The weight of those words, Congressman, doctor, and the echo that followed, "You were wrong." By morning, it was everywhere. Someone had recorded the incident. The video was posted online. By noon, it had gone viral. News outlets picked it up. The headline scrolled across my screen. "Black family confronted in park. Turns out dad is a congressman. Racial profiling in quiet suburb caught on camera. Woman calls police on respected public figures." I didn't open the comments, but I saw enough. This is what real-life racism looks like. She should be ashamed. This happens every day, and most of us don't have titles to save us. I turned off my phone, but silence didn't help. Guilt has a sound of its own. Later that day, I got a message from Julie. "Evelyn, was that you? Did you call the cops on that family?" "Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to say it wasn't about race, that I was just being careful. I had a gut feeling. But now, none of that was true. Because the truth is this: I saw their color before I saw their humanity. And nothing, not my guilt, not my intention, can erase that truth. Isaac. That afternoon, I got a call from my campaign manager. The video has gone national. CNN, MSNBC, and even Rolling Stone are asking questions. People want you to speak out. And soon. I closed my eyes, not from exhaustion, but from being drained. I knew this moment would come. I just didn't think it would come from a picnic. I looked over at Naomi, making tea in the kitchen. Her hands were trembling slightly. We hadn't said much to each other all day, not out of anger, but because there were no words left. We've faced racism before, all our lives. But this time it happened in front of our children, in a place that once felt like a refuge. And this time, there were millions of people watching. I walked over and placed my hand on Naomi's shoulder. "We have to say something," I whispered. She nodded gently without turning. "If we don't speak, who will?" Naomi. That night we sat together, laptop open. The kids were asleep, but I knew they'd hear about this, if they hadn't already. Not from us, but from the world outside. We didn't write out of anger. We wrote to reaffirm who we are, no matter what the world might say. Isaac's words were calm, no resentment, even though I knew his heart was burning. He wrote, "Yesterday my family experienced something painful, an experience many black families in this country know all too well. We were treated with suspicion simply for existing in a public space, not because of what we did, but because we were there. But this isn't a moment for retaliation, it's an opportunity. An opportunity for our communities to reflect. Who do we believe belongs here, and why? I'm not calling for blame. I'm calling for reflection, and from reflection comes change." He posted it to every social platform, and then we waited. Isaac. The response came like a flood. The post was shared thousands of times. Messages of support poured into my inbox. Strangers, black, white, from every walk of life, sent thanks, shared their own stories. Thank you for not staying silent. Thank you for speaking even as the one hurt. We need voices like yours. But even in the support, I felt lost. Because this wasn't a speech before Congress, not a campaign rally. This was my home, my family, my heart. And they were targeted because one person felt uneasy. I kept wondering, what if I hadn't been a congressman? What if Naomi hadn't been a doctor? Would the police have treated us with respect? Or would things have taken a darker turn? Naomi. I saw the video. Someone in the park had recorded the moment the police approached and posted it online. They didn't know who we were, they just knew it had happened. Again. But this time no one was arrested. No one was pinned to the ground. No blood was spilled, just silence. But sometimes silence can be just as painful. Since that day, I haven't slept well. I keep looking at our 2 children. And I keep wondering, how long before they learn the truth? That to some they will always be outsiders? Evelyn, off-screen, not narrating directly. Meanwhile, the woman who called the police, Evelyn Monroe, was facing the consequences of her actions. She was no longer seen as the woman watching over the park. Social media exploded. Hundreds of comments, most filled with outrage. This is the kind of bias that kills without a weapon. This didn't happen in some distant place. It happened in your child's park. She didn't need to hate. Fear was enough. Then came the request for her resignation as head of the neighborhood security committee. They called it temporary, but everyone knew it was permanent. Isaac Naomi told me not to let this turn me bitter. I try to listen to her, but every time I remember the moment I had to prove I belonged here, while my daughter stood beside me, her hand clutching her mother's dress. I can't help but see one thing. It wasn't because I was a good man that I was treated with dignity. It was because they realized I had power. And that? It is the real problem. Isaac, I used to think that resistance had to be loud, that it had to be angry. That you had to break the silence with a fist on the table, with relentless accusations. But that morning, as I sat in our small living room, watching our 2 children still asleep, I realized something else. Sometimes, the strongest form of resistance is simply refusing to bow your head. I've given speeches in packed halls, in Congress, in high-pressure hearings. But this was different, because for the first time, the discrimination wasn't aimed at my title, it was aimed directly at me. And for the first time, I couldn't separate myself from the pain. Naomi sat across from me, her hands gripping a cup of tea like it was the last anchor she had. "I think we should show up," she said. "Not just write, but speak, with our own voices." I looked at her and nodded. Not to protect our reputation, but to protect something more important, the truth. Naomi. 1 week after the incident at the park, we accepted an invitation to appear on a live national broadcast. Part of me wanted to decline, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. But then I saw our daughter carefully folding the jacket she had worn that day. The jacket she wore while being unfairly suspected, and I knew I couldn't stay silent. The interview took place on Thursday night, in an elegant room under soft lights. The cameras rolled quietly, as if even the air was holding its breath. The host asked, "Can you share what it felt like in that moment?" Isaac looked directly into the camera. His gaze didn't waver. "I wasn't shocked," he said. "I was heartbroken, because I knew it could happen to anyone who looks like me. And the worst part is, it wasn't rare." I continued, keeping my voice slow and steady. "I don't hate the woman who called the police. I just regret that her bias was stronger than her faith in her community. We didn't name Evelyn. We didn't attack a person. We named the problem, the silent subconscious bias that hides in plain sight. And because it's silent, it's dangerous. Isaac. After the broadcast aired, our phones wouldn't stop ringing. Hundreds of messages, thousands of comments. Some were critical, but most were supportive. Thank you for keeping your dignity. The way you responded makes me want to teach my children about compassion. No one should have to prove they belong just to live a normal life. That's when I realized anger may burn, but dignity can lead. Naomi. 2 days later, we were invited to speak at a community meeting in Crescent Hill, the same place where, just a week earlier, we were simply a family having a picnic. This time, we weren't alone. More people showed up than at any previous gathering, not because of the scandal, but because they wanted to face a vital question. Is this community truly safe for everyone? I stepped up to the mic, no paper in hand. I didn't need a script for what I had lived. I'm not here to be pitied. I'm here to be seen. Not just by those who know I'm a doctor, but by those who don't need to know who I am to treat me fairly. Isaac continued, we can't repair the past if we don't first face it. And if this community is truly a home for everyone, then it's time for everyone to help rebuild it, together. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then someone clapped, then another, and then everyone. But for me, the applause wasn't the point. What mattered were the eyes of those who had never stood with us, now looking straight at us, unflinching. Isaac, I know there will be more moments like this. More suspicion, more judgment. But this time, I didn't walk through it in silence. This time, I didn't just react. I reshaped the reaction, not with fury, but with purposeful calm, with dignity and defiance, because I believe resistance doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be right. I rewrote that letter at least 10 times. Each time the opening line changed. Sometimes it was, I don't know where to begin. Other times, I don't expect forgiveness, but then, I thought I was a good person. Turns out I've never really examined that. I sat in my small kitchen, the computer screen glowing in the dim light. Outside the window, sunset settled over Crescent Hill, casting each rooftop in soft orange and heavy quiet. But inside me, there was no quiet left. Since the video went viral, I have stayed silent, not out of defiance, but because I no longer knew what was right to say. Every justification sounded like an excuse. Every explanation made me seem like someone trying to escape guilt instead of facing it. I was wrong, not just in my actions, but in a way of seeing the world that had lived inside me for years, unchecked. I stared at the blinking cursor below a blank paragraph. My fingers rested on the keyboard. My heart beat in heavy thuds. Then I wrote, an apology from Evelyn Monroe. To Congressman Bennett and Dr. Bennett, I am the one who called the police at Crescent Hill Park that day. Admitting this, not online, not to the press, but directly to you, is the hardest thing I've ever done. I want to apologize. No words are enough, but I will try. I'm sorry for doubting a family who was simply enjoying a peaceful afternoon. I'm sorry for letting fear and unconscious bias guide my actions. I'm sorry your children had to feel something no child ever should. I know this isn't new for you, and that makes it all the more painful to me. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, but I do hope to learn, to understand, and if possible, to help heal. If there is any way I can make amends, I'm ready to listen. With deep regret and gratitude for the grace you showed, Evelyn Monroe. I read it over. Not perfect, but honest, and this time I didn't delete it. I hit send, then I sat there and waited. I didn't expect a reply. I figured they would ignore it or have an assistant send a polite, distant message. I deserved the silence. But 2 days later, a message appeared. Response to Evelyn Monroe. Dear Mrs. Monroe, thank you for reaching out. We felt the sincerity in your words. Our family has discussed this, and we would like to invite you to an upcoming community dialogue we're hosting at the Crescent Hill Cultural Center this Saturday. This gathering is an opportunity for us to talk openly about bias, about belonging, and about how to move through mistakes without denying humanity. If you're willing to attend, we would be glad to welcome you. Warmly, Naomi Bennett. I read the letter again and again. No sarcasm, no rejection, just an invitation, serious, clear, and open. For the first time in days, I cried, not out of shame, but because a door had opened, and I knew if I stepped through it, I would not return the same person. That Saturday morning, I wore a plain white shirt, simple, unassuming. I arrived early. My hands trembled as I opened the door to the community center. Inside, there were more than 40 people, black, white, young, old. No one looked at me with condemnation, but I knew that look was waiting if I didn't face this the right way. Naomi stepped forward first. She shook my hand, a soft, unforced smile. Thank you for coming. I nodded, my throat tightening. I needed to be here. Evelyn. I don't remember how many times I breathed in before I stood up. The air in the room thickened as I left my seat, walking step by step toward the microphone in the center of the circle. My legs no longer shook, but my heart still pounded, familiar but strange, fear and relief coexisting. The workshop was held at the Crescent Hill Community Center. It was not a large space, but it was large enough for over 50 people, each with their own story. No podium. No tiered rows, just circles of people seated, gripping coffee cups or tissues, a space created to listen. I took a breath. My name is Evelyn Monroe, and I am the person who called the police at the park that day. Every eye turned to me. But no one interrupted, no whispering, just waiting. I'm not here to make excuses. I was wrong, and I'm trying to face that. Not to avoid guilt, but to change. I told the story. In detail, from the moment I first saw the Bennett family to the tap of my thumb dialing 911. At the moment, the officer told me they were a congressman and a doctor. I never thought of myself as racist. But the truth is, I reacted, not to what they did, but to the fact that they didn't look like me. And I can't help but wonder how many times I've done that in my mind, without even noticing. My voice cracked, but I kept going. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking to see clearly and to learn how to stop viewing others through the lens of fear. I returned to my seat. A woman beside me lightly touched my hand. I didn't know her name, but her eyes no longer held suspicion, just recognition and a trace of warmth. Voices from the room. An older man stood behind me. His name was Charles. A veteran. I served overseas, but I never felt more like a stranger than when I wore my uniform and was still followed around in stores back home. A young Asian American student spoke softly. I grew up here, but when COVID hit, people called me the virus on the street. They turned their backs. I've never felt more excluded. A single white mother, her voice trembling, shared, I once told my son, don't play with that group. They don't look safe. I didn't realize what kind of seed I had just planted until today, hearing all of this. Each story was a mirror, not to accuse, but to reflect. Each share was a key, unlocking a door within ourselves we'd kept shut too long. Isaac. When Naomi and I were invited to speak, I thought I'd feel tired, but instead, I felt light. Today, I'm not here as a congressman. I'm here as a father who saw his daughter's eyes change when the police walked toward us. My voice was steady. And I say this with all sincerity. If Evelyn hadn't sent us that email, If she hadn't walked into this room today, I don't know if we would have gotten to this point. Naomi stepped beside me, her voice soft as breath. We don't need perfect people. We need people willing to make things right, and we need a community that helps one another stand, instead of pushing each other down when we stumble. Evelyn. I left the workshop as dusk fell. No one clapped. No one called my name, but there were nods, eyes no longer sharp. A few hands touched my shoulder, and for me, that was enough. On the way home, I passed the park. The bench where I had once sat, once doubted, was still there. I stopped, not to sit, but to look, really look. A child ran past. A mother called her son's name in Spanish. A man read a book, his dark skin glowing beneath the streetlight. This time, I didn't see strangers. I saw people. They weren't in handcuffs. No blood was shed. But make no mistake, this was still an execution. Not with bullets, but with a gaze. If a family must prove they're worthy just to eat lunch in a park, then we've built the wrong bench and the wrong law. The question is, how long until someone's presence is no longer seen as a threat? If this story made you rethink something, share it. Don't stay silent. Because justice doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts with how we look at each other.